Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy Roll Good. Today we're maybe just going to kind of jump right into it for real this time. In my last video we covered, some interactions with the Boon of Bloodshed, or at least as I read them. And there are several comments pointing out there was maybe some wording that I maybe overlooked that maybe suggests a different way that it works. So I kind of wanted to follow up with that video with a new video this week, kind of covering the points that were brought up in the comments of the last video for the Boon of Bloodshed and what weight I think they might hold, maybe push back just a little bit, not necessarily saying that they're wrong, I just don't know that it necessarily holds all the water that they say it does. Without further ado, really let's just jump right back into it. So again, I think the wording is still strange on this boon. So again, the power from pain feature is what we're looking at here, where it says once per turn when you make an attack roll while bloodied at half your hit points or fewer, you can deal extra damage to the target equal to your proficiency bonus. The damage type is the same as the attack's type. So if you didn't watch my previous video, you can go back and watch the full thing for the full explanation and everything else that I said in that video. But the crux of it was that it basically just says when you attack, you deal extra damage. It doesn't even say that you need to hit. Basically, every other effect that adds damage in the game attaches it to something, either to a hit or to a damage roll or to something else. There's never really been a case where it just says when you attack, you deal damage, period. I also said that this makes sense because it would conflict with things like the 2024 Great Weapon Master, which adds your proficiency bonus on hit to the weapon's damage, as well as Hexblade's Curse, which says that it adds your proficiency bonus to any damage roll that you deal. And then there's a rule in the game that says you can't add your proficiency bonus to more than one roll, not just d20 tests, but any roll in the game, which would include damage rolls, of course. So it seems to me that this would be worded in such a way that this would occur before it hits or miss, such that this wouldn't conflict with any feature that would add your proficiency bonus to a damage roll, right? This is an epic boon. It should be epic. It should be maybe able to make exceptions to a maybe more strict rule that exists in the game. However, many commenters pointed out that the word extra here, you deal extra damage to the target, means that it must be added to existing damage. You can't have extra of nothing. And while I'm going to say up front that I think this interpretation could be correct, that you do need to add it to extra damage, I don't know that I necessarily agree with the assertion that you can't add it to nothing, so to speak. Like if I owe you $10 and I'm like, hold on, my $10 is maybe in my other pants, but I have $2, I'll give that to you right now, but I'll still give you the $10 if I have it. You still have extra $2 in addition to the $10 that could happen. The $10 in this case is, of course, my weapon damage. The $2 in this case is the power from pain bloodshed bonus. So it occurs before you receive the money or before the damage is dealt, and it is still extra on top of the damage that I would be dealing if I had the money or if I hit with that attack or miss. Someone else commented that if I can point out an instance where the word extra damage is tacked onto something that exists independently, that I should do so. And that is kind of the problem here, is that this wording doesn't exist anywhere else in the game, where it's not necessarily that it says extra damage, it's the fact that it's not attached to anything else. It doesn't say on hit like many other effects in the game, or like attached to the damage roll. It's just when you attack, you deal extra damage. There's no attachment to where that damage goes. So this is very novel wording. It's the first of its kind, which is why we don't have precedent to really lean on, which is kind of why we're having to focus on what is the meaning of extra right now. Well, I don't usually like to operate under the assumption that the game designers made a mistake. I've said in the past in my videos that I usually like to operate under the assumption that the designers are smart, that they know what they're doing and they do things intentionally. They have made mistakes in the past, but they're not really known to do very aggressive errata. So I would kind of be surprised to see something like this cleared up. Kind of leaves the situation here where extra isn't well defined. Is that extra on top of the weapon damage? Is it extra on top of the damage that I could or would be dealing? Is it just extra in the sense that it's damage that I wasn't dealing before because now I have this feat that allows me to do a little bit of extra damage? And again, like I said, even though I'm kind of pushing back against this, I'm saying that this is probably the right interpretation, but it's just so weird that they didn't take the time to put on hit or attached to a damage roll or anything along those lines. And something that someone else pointed out was that maybe it was worded this way to not say on hit or to the weapon's damage die or whatever, so that it would work with the Graze mastery. However, if we're saying that the extra damage needs to be tacked on to existing damage, then that means it doesn't work with Graze by definition, because Graze specifies that the damage can only be increased by increasing your strength modifier. You can't add damage on top of it. If we were going to sit here and say that you can add the bonus from power from pain onto the Graze damage, then you're also saying that you can add the damage bonus from a Barbarian's Rage onto the Graze damage as well, and I don't think we're making that argument. The Rage says when you make a strength-based attack and deal damage, that you can add your Rage damage bonus. It doesn't specify that you need to hit, so technically it should go on to Graze, but Graze says you can only increase the damage by increasing your strength modifier, and that's it. So if we can't add Rage damage bonus to Graze, then we can't also add the power from pain bonus from Boon of Bloodshed to Graze either. here. So in that case, if it is only on hit, why doesn't it say on hit? Either the designers just forgot, or it just works differently because it doesn't say that it applies on hit. The next thing that someone mentioned is that this maybe should work with the new Great Weapon Master and Hexblade's Curse, because there's maybe a difference between add your proficiency bonus versus add a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus, and that's technically different. I am aware of this distinction and where this discourse comes from. However, and this maybe is a little bit where my hypocrisy will show, but I'm not totally convinced that that's true. This discussion really took off when the Heron Gun was released, because someone was asking what happens if you have a Heron Gun who is also an Oath of the Watcher's Paladin, because their level 7 aura bonus lets them add a bonus equal to their proficiency to their initiative rolls. And the Heron Gun has a feature that says you add your proficiency bonus to your initiative. So if there's a rule that says you can't add your proficiency bonus more than once to any one roll, what's the difference between adding your proficiency bonus to your initiative and adding a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus to a roll? Is that the same thing or is it not? Is there a reason that they worded it differently? You know, we would usually like to argue that since they worded it differently, it must be something different. But the main problem is that this has never actually been codified in any meaningful way. Like they've never errated it to be more clear. I don't think they've even ever addressed it in Sage Advice that I've seen, or at least the published version of Sage Advice. And the one argument that I've seen that I think I would maybe agree with a little bit more is that the reason a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus, why that wording exists, is because you can't be proficient in something like initiative. You can't be proficient in damage rolls. So the wording, you know, a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus has existed for quite some time, but it's when the Heron Gun was released where it says you add your proficiency bonus to your initiative that really kind of threw a wrench in the works. And the Heron Gun here is the outlier, not all the other rules that say add a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus. It's very similar to what we're dealing with here with the Boon of Bloodshed, where it's like they've never phrased something like this before. Why is it different? And we've never really received a good explanation for it. And I will say another reason I'm so on the fence about this one is that it would feel so weird to me that they would make a rule that is so specific, saying that you can't do this. Even if two features say you can't do this. Kind of like, why does this rule exist if they're just going to make a bunch of exceptions to that rule almost every time it comes up? And if that's the assumption that we're operating under, that a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus is technically different than adding your proficiency bonus to a roll, then that is saying that the 2024 Great Weapon Master, Hexblade's Curse, and the Boon of Bloodshed, if it is applied on hit, would all stack, which means that when you hit with that Boon of Bloodshed, Great Weapon Master, Hexblade's Curse attack, that you're adding a minimum of plus 18, at least during your attack action. And then outside of your attack action, it's you know, up to 12 additional damage from the Boon of Bloodshed and or the Hexblade's Curse as well, since you're assuming that you're level 19 or higher at this time. And since the 2024 rule set has really been trying to tone down the amount of burst damage that can happen, it really feels like that's not what they're intending the bonus equal to your proficiency bonus to mean, for it to be technically different than adding your proficiency bonus. I think that's still a really fun idea to maybe explore and see if you can build a character that can take advantage of as many instances of that as you can. But maybe that's something I can look at in a future video, but that's kind of how I feel about that one. I definitely understand where that argument comes from. I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but if I had a DM who was saying that, I'm not going to sit there and argue with them. Like, if I'm the player, I'm going to be sure, I'll go ahead and add my proficiency bonus as many times as I can. But like I've been saying, I think the extra damage probably it's supposed to be on hit. I don't know if that's what I'll operate under myself as a DM going forward, but let's assume that that's correct, that it can only be applied on hit because it needs to be added to additional damage. Does that make the Boon of Bloodshed bad then? I don't remember exactly where I put it on my tier list of whether it's like an A or maybe high B tier. I think if it works whether or not you hit with an attack, that it's potentially very good. Certainly possibly a contender against the Combat Prowess Boon, which is usually the mathematically best one at least. But if this is only on hit, how does that change things? Because another thing to consider is that the Boon of Bloodshed, of course, requires us to be bloodied before that extra damage kicks in, and the extra damage is only once per turn, so most player characters can only do this, in the majority of situations, they can only do this once on their turn and once as a reaction, presumably through some sort of opportunity attack, or anything that lets them attack as a reaction. Let's pretend that we attack only once on our turn and once as a reaction. We're only going to measure those two attacks. Again, we have a 21 strength because the Epic Boon let us increase our strength by 1. We're using a 2d6 weapon, attacking with advantage for the numbers here. We have a +6 to our proficiency bonus, and we're assuming that the Boon of Bloodshed only applies on hit. Then between those two attacks, attack 1 and attack 2 on 2 different turns, our numbers would look a little something like this. This does make the Boon of Bloodshed look pretty decent on paper. One thing to keep in mind here is that we are level 19 or 20 by this time. I'm only including the raw base weapon damage, the 2d6 weapon damage. Presumably by this time you have like +2/3 weapon. You might have like a flame tongue or some similar weapon that deals a bunch of extra damage as well. You might have like smites, sneak attacks, class features, things like that, adding more damage to your attacks. And one thing about combat prowess is that the more damage you deal on a given attack, the better combat prowess is. And we can see here that even if you get the 2 hits with Bloodshed in per round, you're only doing at a base level 3 additional DPR, and you have to be bloody before this kicks in, so it doesn't really feel like the juice is maybe worth the squeeze. So the question kind of becomes, is there a situation where we can make the Boon of Bloodshed good, assuming that it works on hit or just in any way to begin with? So if we kind of take a step back and look at these 3 epic boons, we can kind of look at their pros and cons. So generally speaking, combat prowess favors high damage on each attack. So if you miss with that attack, the value of combat prowess to choose to hit instead, basically measured by how much damage that attack would deal. The pros of the combat prowess boon is that it's the easiest to scale. Adding damage is the most common offensive tool. There's so many class features, again, spells, feats. There's so many things that can add damage to an attack that just make combat prowess just so good in those situations. And one of the cons of combat prowess is that it has an inverse relationship with accuracy. So as your attack bonus increases, and if you're facing much lower ACs, if you never miss with an attack during that combat, then you never get value out of combat prowess during that whole combat. Whereas the Boon of Bloodshed, as long as you hit with an attack, if we're assuming that it happens on hit, then you get that bonus no matter what. Irresistible offense favors basically rolling as many d20s as possible per attack roll, and or attacking as many times as possible per turn or round to try to land a crit at least once per round. A big pro of irresistible offense in some situations is that it also gives you that ignoring, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing resistance. In situations where that happens, of course, irresistible offense is just flat out going to be better than both of these other epic boons because you're literally dealing twice as much damage as you would be otherwise. The cons of irresistible offense is that you're sort of pigeonholed if you really want to make the most use of it into sort of an elven accuracy, or at least having a regular source of advantage to make sure, again, that you're rolling as many dice as possible. Maybe you switch to a dual wield build, or you build in such a specific way that you can make as many attacks as you possibly can to try to land on that natural 20 as many times as you can. But because that extra damage only happens on a natural 20, that means you only ever have a 5% chance. There's no way to scale it other than advantage or triple advantage through elven accuracy or making more attacks. There's no way to really scale it in a meaningful way. So you really have this sort of feast or famine reward structure where sometimes it'll happen, multiple times in one round. Sometimes you won't see it for an entire adventuring day. And irresistible offense kind of, well, it technically has the highest damage ceiling if you were to just roll natural 20s all the time. It, of course, outperforms all of these other epic boons. But because it's only a 5% chance, that is just an impossible ceiling to reach. So it's not really even worth considering compared to combat prowess, which has a very low damage ceiling because you're not really adding any more damage than you would normally be dealing. It's just allowing you to deal a greater percentage of the damage that you could be dealing because you're just hitting with an attack that would otherwise miss. So we then move on to the Boon of Bloodshed. Regardless of how it works, Boon of Bloodshed favors attacking as many turns per round as possible. So a pro of the Boon of Bloodshed is that it's kind of the inverse of combat prowess, where if you have low damage attack, like if you're built very tanky and you maybe have like the defender weapon and that doesn't really add any extra damage, maybe you're a subclass or class that doesn't really have a lot of innate damage riders on it, so you're basically just working off weapon damage. The Boon of Bloodshed is actually pretty good in those situations, and it works off any attack. So a cantrip like Eldritch Blast, which doesn't usually have as many damage riders either through magic items or anything else besides like Hex or other spells that can add damage to attacks. But if you basically have low base attack damage, then Boon of Bloodshed is actually pretty decent comparatively. Even if it's only once per turn, you still want to have that reliable reaction attack to be able to try to get it twice per round if you can. But this is a situation where it's actually kind of decent compared to combat prowess. So then the cons of Boon of Bloodshed is that you really want that reliable reaction attack, because without that, just the +6 damage per round isn't really that great compared to the other 2 epic boons here. And then the biggest con of the Boon of Bloodshed is that it's nearly impossible to scale because it is just a flat 6 damage up to twice per round in most situations. However, it is worth considering that it has a very improbable but higher theoretical ceiling than combat prowess. It's not quite as impossible as the ceiling of irresistible offense, and notice I say twice per round at most because there is actually one subclass that can actually almost abuse the extra damage of Bloodshed, and I wanted to point that one out in this video. Regardless of how the Boon of Bloodshed actually works, it doesn't matter. There's one subclass in the game that does this better than any other, and that is going to be the Cavalier Fighter. They are the theoretically best user of the Boon of Bloodshed due to their capstone ability, which is called Vigilant Defender. And we saw in the UA that they weren't planning on changing this one, at least not yet anyway. We don't know what it'll look like when they actually release a revised version of the Cavalier. But the way that it currently works and will supposedly work in the future says you respond to danger with extraordinary vigilance. In combat, you get a special reaction that you can take once on every creature's turn except your turn. You can use the special reaction to only make opportunity attacks. and you can't use it on the same turn that you take your normal reaction. And this means, since each opportunity attack happens on its own individual turn, that each opportunity attack in this case would apply the bloodshed damage again. So in sort of this magical Christmas land scenario where you had this high level cavalier fighter who is in a combat with a large amount of enemies, each of these enemies is constantly provoking opportunity attacks from this cavalier fighter on every round. They can potentially get more benefit out of the Boon of Bloodshed than they could out of another one of these epic boons, such as the Boon of Irresistible Offense or the Boon of Combat Prowess. But again, remember that the more damage a single attack does, the better combat prowess is. And basically what that's going to do is basically just increase the number of times you need to be able to trigger the Boon of Bloodshed in order to surpass the benefit that the combat prowess boon would give you. However, one thing that the cavalier fighter does have going for it is that it doesn't really have a way to deal extra damage on any attacks. So unless you have like a really powerful magic weapon that is adding a bunch of damage, you don't really have a bunch of extra damage on your attacks. And as I pointed out in the previous slide, the Boon of Bloodshed is pretty good when you have a low base damage. They really just have their weapon and their features, and really none of their features add a lot of extra damage. One thing to note also about the cavalier fighter is that they don't have a lot of natural defenses either. They're really about controlling spaces and zoning creatures and keeping them in place. So if you are going for a high level cavalier, again, you need to be basically 19th level in cavalier at this time because you need to have the epic boon as well as the capstone at level 18. So as far as keeping a strong effective health while you're bloodied so you can stay bloodied longer, you're going to be looking for more support from either magic items or your party's spells and other things that they can cast on you and stay bloodied without going down. However, one thing that the cavalier, because it's a fighter subclass, has going for it is that you get a bunch of extra feats, and that means that we have a ton of different ways to actually unlock opportunity attacks, basically to the point that you can almost guarantee an opportunity attack on many turns, provided that you have a creature within range to do so. The first feature is one that the cavalier just gets naturally at level 10 called Hold the Line. It says whenever a creature within your reach moves 5 feet or more, you can hit them with an opportunity attack, and that reduces their speed to 0. Very similar to the way that a normal opportunity attack works, where if they leave their reach, you can make an attack against them. This one is instead, even if they're within your reach, if they move 5 feet at all, whether it's out of your reach or still within your reach, you can still hit them with an opportunity attack. The next one is the Sentinel feat, of course, which is a very popular one. But one thing to note about Sentinel in 2024 is that the reaction attack that you get when a creature hits someone else with an attack roll that isn't you, that attack is also considered an opportunity attack, which it wasn't before. And then the next option, if we also take the Zentrum Ruffian Origin feat, we can get the Zentrum Tactics General feat, which gives us Retaliate, that says immediately after a creature within 5 feet of us hits us with a melee attack, we can also make an opportunity attack against that creature. And because we took the Zentrum Ruffian background, because we had to get that general feat, that also just gives us the ability to roll our opportunity attack damage twice and use either roll against that target. If you have all of these things going for you as a high level cavalier fighter, you provoke opportunity attacks if a creature leaves your reach. You provoke opportunity attacks if they move 5 feet while within your reach. You provoke an opportunity attack if a creature within 5 feet of you hits someone other than you with an attack roll. And you also provoke an opportunity attack if someone within 5 feet of you hits you with an attack roll. The only way that they don't provoke an opportunity attack from you is if they are either outside of your range, of course, or if they're within your range, that they're standing still, not moving at all, and doing anything other than making an attack roll in some way, whether it's a spell that requires a saving throw or a feature that requires a saving throw, taking the dodge action, whatever. That's the only way that they can avoid taking an opportunity attack from you. And remember that both Hold the Line and Sentinel both say that when you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, their speed is reduced to 0. So not only do you have theoretically unlimited opportunity attacks, you have multiple ways to provoke opportunity attacks. You get to roll damage twice on opportunity attacks. And because in this situation you need to be bloodied, if you're bloodied, you're dealing the extra Boon of Bloodshed damage each time you make those opportunity attacks, which makes the Boon of Bloodshed the best epic boon in this particular situation. It shouldn't be too difficult to be bloodied because, again, you are a class that wants to be surrounded by enemies, and if you're surrounded by enemies, chances are they're attacking you. But it shouldn't be too hard to pull this off, provided that you're in a combat that has a lot of enemies and you're able to sort of get them funneling towards you in the first place. Outside of the situation, probably not that great. I'd probably bump it down to maybe a low B, high C tier epic boon, which is a little unfortunate. I did like the fact that it works off the bloodied condition. I like that other general feat that we saw that gives you advantage while you're bloodied as well. But I still think that this is a really cool interaction with a subclass that has always been kind of one of my favorite fighter subclasses because it has this very unique capstone as well. But as always, again, those are just my thoughts. I would love to know what you think about the Boon of Bloodshed based on everything that I covered in this video. Again, like I said, the fact that it's supposed to be added 2 damage, so therefore it probably is on hit, is maybe the correct answer, but I think that's kind of boring and the less interesting answer. I don't think it's inherently broken to just kind of let the damage happen when they make the attack roll and that damage always applies. But I wouldn't really be mad either way, you know, if I had a DM ruling it one way or the other. Let me know all that and more down in the comments down below. And as always, as you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you're a new viewer or returning viewer to this channel and you like what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting the subscribe button and support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.